Hello, everybody. Welcome to the June installment to the Textile of the Month Club. Today we're going to be talking about Rozashi. So let me go ahead and get this started here. Okay. Rozashi is, let's see, let's turn that on. Okay. Rozashi is one type of embroidery. We'll go over exactly what ro means and the type of stitches that are involved and the type of things the Japanese produce from them. So to begin with, rozashi is a simple stitching technique. It's like any other embroidery. And of course, embroidery by definition means that you're going to be stitching through with the same needle and thread to the back and then bring it back around to the front. Now, there are two types. There's rozashi, but there's also shazashi. Sha is a simple lino weave, as you see on the left. Ro is similar to that, but generally more than one weft strand is being clustered. So in the diagram, you see a three-strand ro, and in the photograph, you also see a three-strand ro weave. But there's also commonly the five-strand one, as you see here, and then there's also the 13 strand. They're almost always odd numbers, okay, for them to work properly in the weave. This is 13. Now, you can also have figurative ones with flowers and things like that, which are combining flat weaves with the lino weave that you're seeing. I haven't shown you an illustration of that, but there is one other one. So we've talked about weft lino. This is a warp lino, which we're not going to be using in our rozashi. Okay, normally the weft type is used. So again, going back to in and out, in and out, it's basically a satin stitch of sorts, okay, as you follow the weave. Most commonly, the three-strand warp weft lino is used. And this gives you some typical examples of the kind of stitches that are used. There really aren't a great many stitches. It's just a matter of combining them. And here you see a piece that's combining all of them, just to give you an example in this detail. And notice the wooden frame. The sha or the ro is simply pasted to the back of it and removed once you're through. Now on the left is a frame that I bought in Japan, but on the right I tried to find a simple substitute. So I found on Amazon a bunch of these frames, simple unfinished frames used for decoupage that could easily substitute once you remove the back stand. And then these are a series of different samples from the collection, my collection, of pieces in progress. I always like to have work in progress. It tells you a lot more about the procedures involved. Okay. There are all kinds of sketchbooks, sample books, guidebooks that are published. This little set is from the 1940s. Okay, and you can see all the different printed nettings that you could order. So it's a bit like buying cross-stitch pre-printed designs on cloth. Again, here's a sample book showing where and how to stitch each color. Okay, this one is from the 1950s. And then, of course, as you stitch these different samples, as you do your collection, you're going to keep samples of your work and paste it into this scrapbook of stitched imagery. So these are actual stitched pieces that this young craftsperson has saved to keep track of their accomplishments. Okay, and you can see that look like a five-strand roll. So these pieces are done on the frame like this, cut out, and then often appliqued to the top of another fabric, such as the handbag you saw a moment ago, or the entire surface is stitched, as you see in this tissue bag. Now, there is a difference between Chinese and Japanese stitching with this. The Chinese do this too. The Japanese tend to use this highly or lightly spun thread, but it is spun, whereas the Chinese tend to use more flossy unspun, which the Chinese pieces tend to have a lot more luster to them because there's no twist in the piece. Okay, so even though the Chinese produce a very significant portion of the ro and shazashi on the Japanese market used in kimono obi, handbags, and so forth. Um, they're both human hands doing creative work, but it's easy to distinguish the two. The Japanese are almost always twisted, and the Chinese are almost always floss, as you saw. So here you can see this is a Japanese person stitching on a Japanese loom with their twisted yarns. Now, this finished piece could be framed as is, or they could be working on a piece like this where a portion of the netting is glued to the frame. And as that stitched portion is finished, the paste is removed from the frame, the fabric is advanced, pasted again, and they continue to go. So this gives you a detail of some of them using all of the different techniques, all of those stitch samples I showed you earlier. Yeah, and a frame piece. Quite often these are so labor intensive, they're not doing large pieces. They're doing small pieces, pieces to be appliqued, um, pieces to embellish, little semamori for you, those of you who have done the charms class. But here we see a Chinese stitched textile for the Japanese market as this fukuro obi. Now let's go back just a minute. This is the piece we saw a moment ago. If we go in there really close, you can see that's not Sha. That's not the netting that this is stitched to. In the background, this is a figurative satin based weave. So what they've done is the shazashi, rozashi stitching that they have then cut out and appliqued to the surface. However, in this case, this uchikake, as large as it is entirely done with the shazashi, rozashi stitching. Okay, that's a massive undertaking. Okay, so that gives you an idea of what we've covered for the basic information. Um, what I'd like to show you now, just very briefly before we go into the group section, this is a piece of the in process one that I mentioned. So these edges are what would have been pasted to the wooden board, and then there's the right side and the wrong side. So eventually this would go into, excuse me, this would eventually go into making a fukuro obi in this case, but it could just as easily be much more yardage and be used for a large wedding kimono or some such. The piece in the back here, which let me tilt up just a little bit, okay? This is called a jimbaori. It's traditionally the type of vest that would be worn over a suit of armor, okay? Not for the peons in the field, but for the generals and so forth. So this piece is entirely rozashi also. Okay, and then this is a finished, completed rozashi obi. And you can see this one is really interesting because it allows the craftsperson, the artist, to have all sorts of different patterns included in the imagery. Okay, so thank you for joining. I'll go ahead and invite the members of the club in and we'll continue with our discussions. Okay, thank you.